Undercover boss orders apple pie at his restaurant stops cold when server says, "Tips don't even buy lunch." The warm, golden light of an early summer morning streamed through the window panes, dancing on the freshly baked apple pies, while the scent of cinnamon mingled with the aroma of freshly ground coffee, making the air inside Foster's Corner Cafe unusually warm and inviting. In a corner of the cafe where the light hung a little lower, Michael Foster sat quietly like any other customer. A light gray jacket draped over his shoulders and a slightly worn baseball cap helping him blend easily into the bustling crowd. No one would guess that his eyes were carefully following every small gesture in the cafe he had built with his own hands. At 50 years old, Michael Foster still carried himself with a dignified air and a calm yet resolute gaze. On the day Foster's Coffee House first opened, he had promised himself that this place would be a second home for everyone who walked through its doors. Every tip, every shift had to be transparent and fair. He believed that only then would the eyes of his staff shine, like the stage lights greeting guests. But this morning, amidst the lively sounds of the cafe, the POS machine beeping steadily like the heartbeat of a hidden secret, the hum of the coffee grinder joins the chatter and laughter of customers, Michael felt a heavy weight in his chest. There was something in the way the staff stood behind the barista counter that he couldn't look away from. The crisp aprons, the half smiles on the lips of the young barista. It was as if a play was unfolding, and he was not invited to watch. Among the neatly arranged golden apple pies on the shelf, Michael spotted Anna. The young woman with slightly disheveled brown hair from long night shifts was carefully wiping away the crumbs left on the counter. Her eyes shone with a resilience, mixed with a weariness that only those who had worked at Foster's for years could fully understand. She moved gently, avoiding the customer's gaze, her small, fragile shoulders quivering slightly whenever the POS beeped coldly like a knock from worries about rent, about meals not quite enough. Michael took a sip of the rich black coffee, its bitter taste biting at his tongue, but it brought clarity like never before. Foster's Corner Cafe now existed in two worlds. One world where customers enjoyed the golden apple pies, sweet as honey on peaceful mornings, and another world where the warm light fell on the staff whose eyes had changed, no longer filled with trust or the pride they once carried, but now reflecting weariness, worry, and sometimes a glint of defiance and resignation. Michael's hand trembled slightly. His fingers brushed over the oak table that had faded with time. He remembered the first day this place opened, standing behind the apple pie counter spooning apple preserves over each pie by hand, giving each staff member a smile and a promise that Foster's would be their home. But now, looking at Anna, he saw that something foreign had crept into that home, something like a small flame, ready to burn down all the values he had worked so hard to build. A group of customers ordered an apple pie, their voices blending with the steady beeping of the POS machine. Michael saw Anna trying to force a smile, her lips curving upward, but her eyes dropped down, avoiding his gaze. There was something in that look that made Michael shiver, the look of someone too used to injustice, someone who had grown accustomed to tips, being sliced away by the cold, indifferent press of a button. Michael glanced around. The golden light highlights the faces of the staff behind the barista counter, where lively laughter mingled with hushed whispers. The scent of apple pie filled the air, but to him now, it was just a sweet veneer masking the bitterness of a system on the verge of collapse. He sighed quietly. His gaze was still on Anna as she turned to tidy the pastry counter. In the yellow light, her hands trembled as she wiped away the leftover crumbs, as if each motion whispered a question she couldn't ignore. Who would get the tips today? Michael gently set his coffee cup down on the table, his eyes glowing with an indescribable light, the light of someone about to confront his creation. All the things he had once believed to be right. And deep in his gaze, there was a quiet question only he could hear. What has Foster's become? He took a sip of coffee, leaving a faint steam ring on the white porcelain cup. His eyes swept over the freshly baked apple pies, steaming behind the glass counter. The warm light from the overhead lamp reflected off the counter, highlighting each leftover crumb like fragments of memories scattered throughout Foster's Corner Cafe. He inhaled deeply, feeling the sense of apple butter and cinnamon, blending into a fragrance that was both familiar and strangely distant. He searched for Anna, the young waitress with slightly messy brown hair, eyes weary yet still glinting with a faint hope. She emerged from the kitchen, carrying the steaming apple pie he had ordered, and set it down in front of him with trembling hands. Her face briefly wore a polite, practiced smile, the kind she'd learned to paste on after so many shifts, but it vanished as quickly as it came when he asked, "How's everything going, Anna?" In that moment, Anna froze, as if the cafe's noise, the steady beep of the POS, and the delicious smell of apple pie had all ceased. The yellow light illuminated her face, revealing lines of fatigue beneath her eyes and messy strands of hair around her temples. Her voice slipped out small and hoarse, as if each word was a needle piercing her own trust. "Tips aren't even enough for me to afford lunch." Those short words hit Michael like a sledgehammer. At that moment, he felt his own heartbeat, a painful drumbeat, echoing in his chest. Tips. The very thing he had poured his trust and decency into, the thing he had believed was a fair reward. For the sweat of those serving at his cafe had now become something that couldn't even buy a young woman lunch in the PFN cafe he had built. Michael quietly brushed away the crumbs on the table, his heart tangled like a spider's web. He remembered those early days when Foster's Corner Cafe was just a small place when he'd stand behind the pie counter himself, carefully counting out every tip for the staff, calculating every shift schedule to ensure fairness for everyone. Back then, their eyes had shone like candles in the dark, a belief that Foster's was their second home. And now this very place had become something he could no longer recognize. Tips, once a gift from customers to show appreciation for those who served them so diligently, had now become a number twisted and distorted by cold clicks on the POS system. And Anna, the one standing before him, her hands still trembling as she set down the apple pie plate, was the living proof of that injustice. Michael's hand tightened around his coffee cup, his knuckles, white as if clinging to something that had already been lost. The golden light still shone down on Anna's face, but in his eyes that light no longer felt warm as it once did. It had grown dull, withered, like the very faith that was draining from his heart. In that moment, Michael knew he couldn't pretend any longer. Foster's was no longer a place where he could sit in his office, sign off on reports, and believe everything was fine. Something warped now existed in this place, and he, Michael Foster, the one who had promised every employee that this would be a home of fairness and sharing, was the one who had to face that truth. The POS beeped once again like a knock at the door of his conscience. Michael looked up at Anna, saw her eyes drop like a candle on the verge of being snuffed out. In that moment, Foster's Corner Cafe was no longer just a place of apple pies and coffee. It had become a battlefield of trust and hope, and he was standing right in the middle of it. Michael sat quietly in the corner of the cafe, the warmth of his coffee on the table, like the shallow breath of a dream that had once been bright. His eyes moved across every detail. The warm golden light stretched across the apple pie counters, casting its glow on the barista stations, where staff bustled to prepare for the rush. But that very light also acted like a spotlight, exposing cracks that Michael had never seen or had never wanted to see. Amid the steady beeps of the POS machine, he noticed the group of young staff, those who always manned the barista counter during peak hours. Their uniforms were crisp, their smiles bright, as if performing a part in a play he had never scripted. The yellow light reflected off the glass counter, illuminating their faces with a confidence, sometimes even a hint of arrogance. Michael felt a jolt of surprise as he saw the young barista's eyes dart quickly to the POS screen, that look in his eyes speaking a language only those behind the scenes could understand. Tips were power, a reward for loyalty to management, not a gift for those who deserved it. At the far end of the apple pie counter, Anna kept on with her work. She quietly wiped away the remaining crumbs, her thin shoulders trembling slightly with each breath. The golden light spilled down her face, casting faint shadows of fatigue. Michael watched her eyes, those eyes that no longer shone, like in the early days when Foster's was a second home for all. Now in Anna's eyes there remained only a faint glimmer, like a candle before the wind, a light belonging to those who had learned to live with injustice. Michael leaned forward, his gaze landing on the POS screen, the very machine he had once believed was the emblem of fairness. He remembered that feeling back then, when his hand touched the settings button, every tip would be recorded, fairly distributed, with no room for deceit. But now under the dim yellow light, he saw the young barista's finger hover over the pool tips button, a single click, and Anna's tips vanished from her name, merged into a cold number, waiting to be redistributed by management. A long sigh seemed to lodge itself in Michael's throat. He could feel his heartbeat slow, the beat of anger and bitterness. He looked around the barista counter, where young employees gathered laughing and chatting, their eyes gleaming, but no longer as pure as they once were. The golden light cast their shadows onto the POS screen, reflecting a light of calculation, of self-interest that he had never wanted to see at Foster's POS. Across the apple pie counter, Anna looked up and met his gaze. Just a fleeting moment, but enough for Michael to see the weariness and despair gnawing at her eyes. The golden light reflected off her eyes in a thin strip like the last crescent moon wavering in a sea of night. In those eyes, Michael saw all the dreams that had faded, the promises that had been suffocated by the very system he had built. The early days suddenly rushed back like a light breeze between summer rains, an image of himself standing by the apple pie counter, personally dividing up every single tip for his employees, their eyes lighting up like morning stars. The hearty laughter, the genuine words of thanks, the firm handshakes as promises Foster's would always be a home for everyone. But now that look was gone. Only downcast eyes remained, glances tinged with suspicion or glinting with a wary caution. Michael's hand tightened around his coffee cup, the heat from the cup searing into his palm, as if to remind him that what was happening now was real, the harsh reality he had let creep into this second home. The golden light still bathed everything in a honeyed glow, but to Michael it had become the stage light of a play he no longer wanted to watch. In that moment he knew only he could change everything. No one else understood the value of Foster's the way he once did. And Anna, with her resigned eyes like a candle about to go out, was the reason he had to start all over again. Michael took a deep breath, his eyes locked onto the POS screen, where the green light still blinked steadily. In his heart rose a feeling both familiar and unfamiliar, the feeling of someone who had once built everything from scratch. At that moment, a thought flashed, no longer just anger or disappointment, but a decision. He stood up, his hand gripping the handle of his coffee cup, and stepped toward the barista counter. His footsteps echoed on the wooden floor, mingling with the steady beeping of the POS like a reminder. The young barista looked up, his confident smile faltering as he met Michael's eyes. In that gaze, he no longer saw a lenient boss or an ordinary customer, but the eyes of someone who had built this place with his own hands from the ground up. Michael stopped in front of him, his gaze fixed on the hand resting on the pool tips button. His voice was low but rang out with steel, like a bell tolling in the rush of the morning. "You know what that button is used for, don't you?" The young barista hesitated for a second, his eyes flickering, then regained his confident look. "Yes. To calculate tips for the shift, sir." Michael nodded slightly, his eyes boring into the barista's, his voice like metal striking stone. "And do you know whose hard work disappears with every click of that button?" A brief silence, only the sound of the POS. Machine-like knives slicing through the air. The young barista pursed his lips, his eyes shifting between confusion and fear. Michael slowly placed his hand on the bar, his voice dropping low. "When I designed this system, I wanted it to be fair for everyone. Every tip is sweat. It's the hope of every staff member standing here. That click of yours, just one click, can turn Anna's sweat into a reward for those who don't deserve it. Think about it. What right do you have to do that?" The young barista's eyes lowered, his hand trembled lightly on the countertop. Michael did not let his gaze drop. His voice was as hard as steel. "I used to stand in your exact position, counting every single tip, dividing it fairly among everyone. I know the feeling when an employee's eyes light up because they know they are treated fairly. Have you ever seen that look?" A bead of sweat rolled down the young barista's temple, sliding down the edge of his uniform collar. He remained silent, not answering, his hands still trembling. Michael tightened his grip on his coffee cup, then lifted his head to look directly into the young man's eyes. His voice now lower, but no less stern. "I built this place so that everyone could trust each other. But with just one click from you, you destroyed everything I once believed in. Do you know that?" A soft breath, as if the young barista himself had just exhaled after Michael's words. The golden light reflected on his face, revealing the tension and fear. Michael breathed slowly, his gaze sweeping over the young man's face, then stopping at the hand still resting on the pool tips button. He lifted his hand slightly, pointing straight at the screen. "Turn that feature off, right now, and call the manager over here. I need to talk." His voice hardened like a blade, skimming across steel, leaving no room for any excuses. Under the soft yellow light, Michael's face shone with steely determination. He knew that once that click was gone, Anna and everyone like her would once again receive fair tips, just as he used to do. And that was the first step toward real change. Michael stood up abruptly, his breath pounding like the heartbeat of the cafe itself, pulsing beneath his feet. The golden light tilted across his graying hair, reflecting in his eyes that blazed with resolve. His voice rang out hard and powerful, slicing through the cafe's quiet atmosphere. "This is your sweat and tears stolen by the managers themselves. From today, every single tip will be distributed to the one who deserves it." The entire cafe froze as if time had stopped. The POS machine beeped slowly, the green light from its screen swept across the manager's face as he hung his head, his hands trembling, his eyes adrift like a man stripped bare in front of a crowd. His lips moved, but no sound came out, his chin quivering, revealing an unhidden fear. Michael took another step, his voice lowered, but still, as hard as heated steel. I once believed Foster's was the home of fairness. I used to personally oversee every single tip to ensure that every person working here received the reward they deserved. But now this very place has turned into a stage for those who only know how to count their own benefits. A bead of sweat slid down the manager's cheek, the green light reflected on his pale face like a silent accusation. His eyes darted about, his hand trembling, as he tried to hide his fear, but he couldn't hide the heavy breaths and the hot tears threatening to spill from his eyes. In the silence, Anna stood still at the corner of the pastry counter, her cream-colored apron faded like old promises. Her eyes were brimming with tears, yet within that gaze was a new light, a light of hope, of justice awakening after long weary nights. A tear rolled down her cheek, sparkling under the yellow light, like a small flame illuminating the dark corners of everyone's heart. Michael saw that tear as a wake-up call, reminding him why he had built Foster's in the first place, so that everyone could hold their heads high, so that no one would have to hide from their own hard work. He raised his hand and pointed directly at the POS system, his voice firm but warm. From this day forward, there will be no more unfair tip sharing. Whoever works harder will earn more. Every tip will reach the hands of the one who deserves it without any form of cheating. Foster's will return to being the second home for all of us. The beep sounded again, but this time it was no longer the knock of injustice, but the sound of justice opening its door. The yellow light fell on Michael's face, reflecting in his eyes a determined look. The look of a founder who had just reclaimed Foster's from the hands of those who had turned it into a tool of greed. A gentle breeze drifted through the door, carrying the scent of warm apple pie and freshly roasted coffee. In that space, Foster's Corner Cafe seemed to awaken, welcoming the dawn of fairness and sharing, just as Michael had always hoped from the very beginning. Michael looked straight into the manager's eyes, his voice deep, decisive, and firm. I want you to explain. Explain to everyone here and to your own conscience why Foster's has become a place where employees have to say that tips aren't enough to buy even a lunch. The air thickened. The yellow light fell on the manager's face, his lips quivering, his eyes darting around, looking for a safe place but finding only the silent faces watching him. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple, falling onto the tiled floor, vanishing like a silent confession. Michael didn't let him respond, his voice steady and sharp like a blade. I once taught everyone here that Foster's is a place where every employee is respected, shared with, and paid fairly. But today I see in Anna's eyes, and in the eyes of so many others, that those words have been betrayed. And where did it start? From the numbers on the POS, or from those who turned the hard work of others into rewards for their inner circle? He paused, his gaze sweeping over each person behind the counter. For a moment, the yellow light reflected in Michael's eyes that no longer held the softness of a dreamer founder, but the gaze of a father witnessing his brainchild being twisted beyond recognition. He pointed directly at the pause, his voice rising, powerful, yet warm enough to reach the hearts that were pounding. From now on, this pause will no longer be a tool for fraud. It will be the door leading to fairness. Every tip will be public, transparent, and delivered into the hands of the one who deserves it. No more pool and split games. From today, Foster's will be a place we can all proudly call home. A gentle breeze drifted through the window, stirring Anna's worn apron. The tear on her cheek had not yet dried, but in her eyes, Michael saw a new light, the light of someone who had found hope after long, weary nights. In that moment, Michael felt as though he himself was being reborn, as though Foster's was being reborn. And he knew no matter how hard it would be, he would rebuild everything with them, starting from this very place, from that tear, so that Foster's Corner Cafe would truly become a second home for every employee. Anna was promoted. The day she stood behind the barista counter, her new name badge gleaming on her chest, Foster's Corner Cafe seemed to glow. The yellow light shone on her face, reflecting eyes that no longer held sorrow but now burned with a flame of hope. In every gesture, greeting customers, pouring coffee, scheduling shifts for colleagues, Michael saw a new confidence, the vitality of someone who had weathered the storm to become a symbol of fairness, of resilience. The prime shifts were no longer the exclusive privilege of the favored few. The new schedule displayed on the POS was like a promise, etched firmly into a reborn. Foster's, everyone would have a chance, everyone had the right to stand in the place they once only dared to dream of. No more averted eyes, no more sighs of those stuck in the slow shifts. Every employee could now hold their head high, knowing their effort would be recognized fairly. Michael stood quietly watching the POS, its screen glowing green, like a reminder, just one click a button to redistribute tips. A name properly placed could change the entire system. A short meeting, a few minutes of listening, was all it took to open a new door for fairness. Everything that had once seemed complicated, messy, turned out to only need one decision to stand up and fight for what was right. In the final moment, Michael stood quietly in the cafe, the warmth from the cup in his hand spreading through his fingers like a lifeline coming back to life. His eyes fell on Anna's face. She was standing at the apple pie counter, the yellow light shining on her soft brown hair, her smile as radiant as a new dawn. In those eyes, Michael saw not just faith, but a reflection of his younger self, when he was young, when he believed Foster's was the home of sharing. In his heart, a whisper rose, not loud enough to be heard, but enough for himself. A single tear has changed the entire system. Justice does not lie in revenue reports, nor in the italicized numbers on the POS screen. It resides in the eyes of those who sweated to build a dream, in how we treat each colleague, each human being. Sometimes just a glance, a single tear is enough to shake an entire system that once seemed unchangeable. In Foster's Corner Cafe, a place that once seemed to have lost the spark of humanity, has now found that light again, a place where every employee can hold their head high and proudly declare justice is real. A delicate, heart-wrenching story painting the journey of Michael Foster, the founder of Foster's Corner Cafe, as he himself became a witness to a bitter reality. The place he once called the second home for his employees had been twisted by the hands of the greedy. The cafe's golden lights, the fragrant apple pies, the beeping of the POS machines were no longer the sounds of sharing, but a warning of the creeping injustice. From Anna's resigned gaze, Michael saw the last flickers of trust slowly extinguishing. And it was at that very moment that a fierce determination arose within him to win back justice for the people who had placed all their hopes in Foster's Corner Cafe. Just one resolute statement, just one click on the POS screen, so small, yet enough to turn an entire system manipulated by a few. The tear on Anna's cheek was not just a sign of sadness, but a light of a new dawn, a place where every employee could raise their head high and smile. Because justice does not lie in revenue reports, but in how each person treats one another. If you'd like, I can craft each part in detail following Robert McKee's storytelling style, with each part consisting of 1,000 words entirely fresh and without repeating any previous ideas. It would be a deep, captivating, and emotional journey that would take the audience to the very heart of the story.